This is Apotheosis, the official podcast of the Production Designers Collective. I'm your host, Alexander Whittenberg. Thanks for tuning into the second episode of our ongoing sub-series, Notes from the Field. Today we're joined by the brilliant Alexandra Schaller, whose credits include After Yang, Why the Last Man, and The Get Down. We'll dive deep into her work designing the beautiful world of Train Dreams, a new film which you can watch today on Netflix. Please note that due to the demanding schedules of those in our industry, these conversations are recorded in a nomadic and remote space, which may lead to inconsistencies in quality, but we'll always do our best to deliver a great listening experience. If you've been enjoying Apotheosis, please consider taking a moment to rate the podcast and share with those who might also enjoy the program. And now, here's my conversation with Alexandra Schaller.
Last time I saw you, we were in Savannah at the SCAD Savannah Film Festival, where this film that we're going to talk about today, Train Dreams, was showing. I hadn't seen the film then, but I have now, and I'm really excited to talk to you about it. And also, what a great time we had in Savannah. So I'm
I
happy
love
we
that
get to connect
festival.
here now.
Yeah, that's my
That's
new
nice.
favorite festival. That's a question that I always get asked. What's your favorite festival? And now it's definitely SCAD. Like, it was just so much fun and the vibe there. And yeah, it was really nice hanging with you and the other designers that we were with.
Totally agree. It was a great time. But now here we are in the virtual studio, Apotheosis, and the way I start all of these interviews, conversation. I like the word conversation better than interview. Interview is far too professional. But I always start these conversations with one question, which is, what does creativity mean to you? So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
That's such a big question.
Too early in the morning?
Well,
You
I
need
was
more
thinking I was thinking about it, and what does creativity mean to me? I think it's creativity. I think that somewhat everybody has it inside of them, right? It's like this noticing of the world around you, and I feel like creativity is maybe a physical expression of something deep inside, which comes out when you pay attention to the world around you and you tune in long enough until something reveals itself. And thinking about this question, I went to see the Nutcracker last week, and it was kind of amazing. All the dancers were so beautiful, but there was one in particular, and I don't mean physically, I mean the steps, the choreography, their movement. It was really, really stunning. But there was one in particular that I couldn't take my eyes off. And I just felt like she was feeling the music and the space, and I don't know, the steps and the movement was sort of coursing through her body in a different way. And I was like, okay, well, that to me is an expression of creativity, like the way that, she was really feeling it. It's sort of like an interior feeling organizing itself in the world, I guess.
I love that. That resonates with me. And I think with the Nutcracker in particular, it's funny is that so many professional dancers spend so much of their professional lives dancing in the Nutcracker. And so it's this
Right.
piece of work that is so familiar to them and it probably is so ingrained in their body. And to find a way to make it new at every performance, it seems to me like that dancer was really tuning into something deeper that allowed her to let that be a completely new experience every time she hit the stage, right?
Totally. And, it's not that she was necessarily better or the other ones were worse, right? Because I think that, it's important not to try to quantify the creativity, right, as good or bad. It sort of is. And there was just something really special about her, and the other thing I was thinking about with this, and also because I was, just at the Nutcracker in the theater, and, when I was in school, I studied Shakespeare. I went to school in England. I studied Shakespeare and, A Midsummer Night's Dream to death. And then I was just remembering, a line from A Midsummer Night's Dream where who says it? It's at the end. I think it's like Theseus, who's, talking about, how he's sort of being a little cynical, and he's trying to explain away the magic of what happened in the forest, but I feel like he kind of describes creativity, and obviously that's Shakespeare's voice coming through. And what's the line? I think he says, the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them into shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. And so, I was like, that's it. That is creativity.
Oh, that's great. I'm super impressed at your memorization there too. It's great.
Well, no, I mean, it was honestly, you completely drilled into me. I mean, The Midsummer Dream and The Tempest are my two favorites, and I basically know it off by heart. And I just feel like I'm turning into my dad, who's, a scholar of English, who's like constantly, referring back to Shakespeare. But really, if you look, the answers to everything point back to Shakespeare. It was all there in the text.
It's true. Then give me your hands if we be friends, and Robin shall restore amends.
Exactly. There you are.
Okay, so obviously theater is something that was important in your life. It kind of led you down the artistic trajectory into the world of film. And so I'm curious, well, I guess you sort of did just share an early artistic inspiration with Shakespeare at school, but is there something else maybe from like your childhood, a memory that you remember that kind of inspired you in some way?
Let's see. I grew up with a single mother with a very bohemian sensibility. I wouldn't say that she is a bohemian, but she just has that kind of air about her. And, she studied art history, and she loves to travel. And so art was always part of I was always surrounded by art. And because she was a single mother and she loved to travel, she took me everywhere with her. I mean, from a very young age, like age 0 up. And so, I feel very fortunate that I was always exposed to art and museums and travel and monuments and all of that. And so I think that being exposed to culture so young made art feel very accessible and kind of normal. And similarly, my parents took me to the theater a lot. And I just think that, it was really that moment when the lights go down and you're suddenly somewhere else that I was just so captivated by. And I don't think I knew it, back then, but I think that, this idea that, space, could hold an entire universe, and transport you somewhere else was what kind of sparked my interest in world building, without really knowing it. But it's this idea of like traveling to another place, but staying physically in the same place.
Yeah. I love that. And I think, it's funny, the world building words are thrown around a lot, that particular phrase, but it really is kind of like the best way to describe, what it is that we do as production designers. And I have to say, one of the, best examples of world building that I have experienced was not on the screen, but in the live theater in the form of Sleep No More, which was a project in New York that I know you worked on. I experienced it only once, but had a transformative experience in that I was with a group of friends. Of course, we all got kind of split up and went our own ways. And then we were reunited at the end of the evening, and we shared stories about what each of us had encountered on our own without the other person knowing that was happening. And it was a deeply impactful experience. And I think what made it so impactful was the attention to detail, the storytelling that surrounded us. So might you share briefly about your experience working on that project and how you contributed to Sleep No More?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't a designer on Sleep No More. I was working on the team under two wonderful production designers who work on all of the Punch Drunk shows, and that's the English theater company. But I had worked on some of their shows in London, and I knew that they were opening this show in New York, and they're like, "Oh, well, do you want to come?" And I thought, "Yeah, sure. Let's go and do it." And it was a huge production. Massive. We transformed 6 floors of a warehouse in Chelsea that had been a nightclub, and it was a really big endeavor. But I remember the night we opened, it was just us doing it. Like, we didn't know how it was going to be received or whatever. And I remember we didn't have a liquor license even. So I remember
Gosh.
I remember running to the dollar store and buying punch bowls and like making punch to serve before we had our license. It was a very hands-on, experience on, all sides. And I think that, before I worked specifically on that show, I mean, I went to art school in London. I went to Central St. Martin's, and I started in doing, in the School of Fine Art. And I found myself doing these light-based installations and sculptures. And it was, okay, in my mind, I was doing, quote unquote sculpture, but really it was, playing with this idea of creating an atmosphere and space, and how the experience of the space affects the experience of the artwork. And but I think I was your, typical sort of, 19-year-old, tormented artist who was a pest, who could never, I found myself, I never went to the studio during the day. I couldn't work during the day. I could only work at night. And, whatever. It was all these things. And finally a tutor said, listen, no offense, he said, but you were going to go to an early grade with this stuff. Like, it's not possible for you to work this way. I think perhaps maybe you need a little more structure. And so I think you should consider this other course that's still within the School of Fine Art, but it's called Design for Performance. And the reason I mention it is because it's through that course, which the designers of the Punch Drunk designers also did that course a few years before me. But that's how I discovered immersive theater, and that's where I really learned that, the space is really a partner in the performance and isn't just a backdrop. And so, on a show like Sleep No More, the set has to work from every single angle, at any distance and at any moment in time. And so, I feel like that level of detail is important and key to the storytelling. And I feel like it's, to be honest, not dissimilar to what we do in film. And what was wonderful about that course is that even though it's called Design for Performance, it was a very conceptual, abstract course. And so they were like, well, what is a performance? A performance can be anything. And so they were like, all these kind of skills, all these methodologies that you're learning here are applicable to any kind of art that you make. And so I feel like I try to bring that sort of immersive, detailed, theatrical sensibility to the movies that I do.
Well, and I think you do. I really do. I think it's interesting you experience, or you spoke to the kind of the audience experience of being invited into the world, or actually the audience is in a sort of choose your own adventure way, having the opportunity to turn the corner, where in a theater set, you might have a raw flat with no, it's not designed to be part of the world, but in a space where the audience is free to roam as they please, you have to really consider those details and how they're affecting
totally. And I just feel like there's, the way that I had worked in some on some films in London, but I was really a theater person. And I ended up doing movies because after I came to New York and I explained them, I realized there's not that much theater like that here. And I love the theater, and I love, in the UK and in Europe, there's funding for the arts, which is the thing that's fundamentally lacking in this country, I think. And what was very interesting to me at the time was this idea of making the theater accessible, right? It's like, so there's funding for the arts in the UK. So theater tickets are a lot less expensive than they are here, which automatically means that a regular person, can more easily go to the theater. But there's a lot of theater, quote unquote theater, that is also quite stuffy. And so a lot of this immersive work, like Secret Cinema, like Punch Drunk's work, is about making it not just financially accessible, but actually thematically accessible to people, by bringing people in and by inviting people into the world maybe it feels a little less serious. It feels a little less elitist, something like that.
Yes, yes, yes.
So
Highbrow,
that's
it
what's
can't be
interesting.
highbrow and brilliant
Exactly.
in New York Magazine, right?
Right. But obviously, a show like Sleep No More is a very expensive show, so
Yeah.
there's that balance. But that's what I like about immersive design. I feel like it makes it accessible in a way, or sometimes
Yeah.
inaccessible. Actually, my dad, when he went to see Sleep No More, was like, I was so overwhelmed, I didn't know what to do. I spent the whole time looking for you. So I don't know. So maybe cancel everything I just said. I don't know.
To each their own, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned something that you had spent some time working on these sort of conceptual light installations,
Yeah.
which I think is really interesting because I think production designers are always concerned with light, even though you might directly associate light with the DP.
Mm-hmm.
Production designers are always having to think about light and the quality of light and how light affects the spaces we design and blah, blah, blah. I say this to say that the film we're here to talk about today, Train Dreams, really affected me. And I think in huge part due to this kind of leaning into the natural environment and the natural light. And um, I just recently saw a 35 millimeter screening of the film. Thought it was beautiful. It reminded me, it made me nostalgic about a few other films I had seen in my childhood. Um, and it felt like it was a dream. It felt like it was a poem, and it felt like it came from the earth itself. Um,
Wow. What a
so I'm
compliment. That's a
curious.
compliment.
Well, I something I think about a lot is how everything that surrounds us comes from the earth first. Everything comes from natural resources that we pull from the earth to create all the technology we have and everything. So to take that in a literal sense back to its, no pun intended, roots, I really I walked into that.
That's
Parma,
cute.
I
It's
did
cute.
not
It's cute.
plan
Just
that.
keep going. Yeah, it's
Okay.
good.
I gotta limit the puns.
No, we'll just do it. We'll just do tree puns.
Okay. um so let's branch off into another question. I just want to ask to start, how did Train Dreams come into your life?
To be honest, very unromantically.
That's okay. Not
Because
everything needs to be romantic.
no, because we don't know how I came across these images, but somehow I did. We think it's through the costume designer, who's a very good friend of mine, but we're not sure. But I basically came to these very preliminary lookbook that Clint had put together for the movie, and I was like, wow, this is my kind of guy. So I just DM'd him on Instagram, quite honestly, and miraculously he wrote me back, and he was like, hey, so just as it happens, I am doing interviews for the movie right now. Would you want to meet? And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. And so the next day, I met him, and then we really hit it off. And so I guess we have Instagram or the costume designer to thank for that.
That's great. I like to say that this film speaks the language of dreams. So how do you design a world where dreams feel embedded in the earth rather than kind of floating in an ethereal space above reality?
What a question. Well, I guess I would say that, grounded in the earth is the right way of putting it. So much of the movie takes place in Grainier's memories. And how you remember something is not necessarily how it was, right? And so I feel like we had a little bit of latitude with different takes that are used throughout the movie, kind of, weaving in slight differences. But the main thing is that, Clint and Adolfo were very clear about the fact that they wanted a documentary-like realism to the way the movie was shot. And, the novella and the script both had a very dreamlike undercurrent. And so I thought a lot about, okay, well, how do we weave this dreamlike undercurrent, with this documentary style realism? And that's to, have everything come out of the world that's already there, so that all of the dreamlike quality is immediately motivated. So it doesn't take the audience out of the surroundings. So it's like the earth that's giving us that quality, and it's just about curating it, I guess.
I love that. I think there's some images that are really striking to me. The one that comes to mind first is the shoes being nailed into a tree.
Well, yeah.
And then the sort of over time, the earth kind of starting to close in on those shoes, and it becomes sort of one. Um, I have to believe, was this based on specific research you found, or is this something that was just in the novella? Because I had never heard of that as like a thing before, and I had never seen an image like that. It was really striking to me, and I'm
That
curious
was in the
where that
novella.
visual came from. It was okay.
Yeah, that was something in the novella, and it was really. Clint was very clear from the very beginning that we were making the script and not the novella. However, it was very important to him to maintain the essence of the novella, and so there are some images that are lifted, and there are some that we created based on what the script was asking for. But really, we wanted to stay true to the general feeling of the novella. But that was something that came from the novella.
And did you read the novella early on?
I did, actually. I did. I was torn. I was really torn about it because, I feel like when I work on, I don't know, pick any genre of project, sci-fi, whatever. I'm not going to watch a bunch of sci-fi movies as reference, because then I feel like, it's just going to, someone else's work is going to be so embedded in my consciousness. And I was just like, okay, well, do I read this novella or not? And I felt like in this case, yes, because I hadn't actually read a lot of Dennis Johnson. My husband's a huge Dennis Johnson fan, and we have books of his on the bookshelf. But I felt like because, Clint is a huge Dennis Johnson fan, and he really wanted the essence to be in the movie, I felt like it would do it an injustice to not read it. What I will say is that I feel like he and Greg did a beautiful job of translating all of that into the script. There are some departures from the novella, but to me, it's really an echo of Dennis's original work. And Cindy Lee, who is Dennis Johnson's widow, was also quite involved. Not great. So much. She wasn't there all the time, but it was definitely like her opinion mattered. So that was the connection there.
Brilliant. You've mentioned a couple artists, in particular James Turrell and Andy Goldsworthy, both of whom I adore. In fact, James Turrell's piece at MoMA PS1. It's a meeting room with the square that's open to the sky above. And then also Andy Goldsworthy, who my freshman year of design school at Purchase, we were showing the documentary Rivers and Tides about Andy's work. And we have a couple sculptures of his actually at Purchase as well. So both those artists have been artists I go back to a lot. So I was excited when I heard you mention both those names in a previous interview. How did their philosophies of light and land art and impermanence, how did all those things kind of influence the visual language of the design?
Well, that was one of the first things that Clint and I connected over. It was the work of the land artists, and how often the work is very monumental in scale, but it's a very intimate experience. And that was just kind of the thesis, right, of this movie. It's just that we're following a man through his life, his ordinary life, and then he's in this big world, in this primordial landscape. And so it felt like this idea of impermanence, and this idea of using the land as both the material and the canvas felt right for this movie, because everything needed to be grounded in reality. So, we used natural materials for almost everything. I mean, we built our log cabin out of real logs from the area and, not scenery, and because everything needed to feel like it had sprung from the earth. And that's what I would say about the land artists. I guess they gave us a framework about how to approach the design.
I know there's a thought about this film kind of following the life cycle of a tree.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
That's true. Yeah, that was very important to me. It was very important to me to be following it throughout. Mm-hmm.
And it kind of echoes, in a sense, this is like the life of Robert Grainer, right? It
Mm-hmm.
kind of is following the life cycle of the land and his life.
Totally. And his life. And, what I love about the movie is that I think everybody takes something different away from it. And I mean, that's the same with a lot of art, right? But, for me, it's a bit existential, right? It's about our place in the grand scheme of things and how, the result of destruction. And, the movie takes place over so many years of a man's life. And so we had to track the landscape constantly changing. And we wanted to establish the big old growth forests that, by the way, don't exist anymore because we cut them all down. But we had to establish that. And then we had to see, those trees being cut. And then, we want to see the destruction of the mountainside and how stripped it was. And then we want to see new growth after a fire. And so we're seeing the natural life cycle of the tree. But then in terms of the human intervention on nature, I wanted to see logs throughout the movie. So the trestle bridge, it was very important to me for the actual trestle part to be made of logs as opposed to beams. And it was they were traditionally made both ways. But the archival images I saw of these logs was really, the thousands and thousands of logs and trees that were cut down for this was really astonishing. And so it was very important to me to use logs there. And the same in the fire tower in the 1940s, the support structure of the fire tower is also logs for the same reasons. They just want to be reminded of the tree and the landscape and nature, throughout the film.
That's amazing. It was great to see so much done in camera practically too. Could you speak a bit to the bridge in particular and your collaboration with the VFX on how you together made that a reality?
Yes, I mean, I don't know. This was a really hard movie to make. I will say that at every point, the land and the place told us no. And this is, I think it's important to remember this is a small movie. I mean, it's a tier 2 independent movie. So what is it, $10 to $12 million budget ish? And what I feel like when we approach designing movies of that scale, I feel like one of the things that we need to do is find existing locations and enhance them, right? And not build from scratch. And that was hard for us, but we were really lucky with this bridge. Our excavator, Butch, was his name. He was a wonderful man, local to Spokane. Said to us, "Oh, hey, he knew that we couldn't find any trestle bridges, let alone trestle bridges with log supports anywhere, within our shooting distance." And he went, "Oh, I know a guy up near the Canadian border with an old train track, on its property. You might want to go up there and check it out." And we went up there, and lo and behold, there was an old train track there. And there's a very dramatic scene at the beginning of the movie where someone is thrown from the bridge, and so this bridge needed to be very tall, and we couldn't find it. So the track and the bridge was defunct, and so we had to do a lot of work to it to make it look as though it was actively being constructed. And we had to set up a logging operation right there, because the idea is that the loggers were cutting the trees, and then as they were cutting the trees, they were building the railroad. And so we had to set all of that up. And we couldn't get the height. And so I worked with our VFX supervisor, Ilya, who was a wonderful person. I brought him onto the project. I've worked with him before. I knew that he was really the person who could make our visual effects feel naturalistic. And, I shared a lot of the incredible photos from the time, and he was able to make it happen.
This film deals with planes, trains, and automobiles, of which you built practically. I was so delighted on your Instagram to see. First of all, anybody who is not following Alex on Instagram, go do that now, because their content has been brilliant. It's been really nice to see behind the scenes and hearing kind of your insight into the design of this film. But I had no idea that you all did the plane practically, and that you did the train, of course, you had to build. So talk to me a little bit about that, because both of those are pretty like special kind of one-off projects that really paid off in the film.
Well, again, I think it goes back to, naive us thinking, oh, it's an indie movie. I'll just call up the Railway Museum and we'll get locomotive and we'll just, rent a vintage airplane. That seems like a normal thing. And,
Easy
we
peasy.
did both. We did both of those things. We called the Railway Museum and they were like, well, we have this, we have that. And, it wasn't even supposed to look like a proper train. I mean, it's supposed to be a small, prototype locomotive that they're sending across the bridge to see if it's structurally sound. And, I was like, listen, there's no way we can build this. I don't have any, we have 5 different iterations of the cabin, we're making trees, like we're maxed out here on the indie budget. And, the trestle bridge we ended up finding was way up on the Canadian border. And so even if I had found the perfect, museum relic, like would it have fit on the tracks that were there? I don't know. And we couldn't even get it there because we couldn't afford the trucking.
Oh gosh.
So we're like, okay, I guess we got to build this thing. And so my art director, John Lavin, and he lives in Seattle, and he's a production designer in his own right, an incredible artist, was like, all right. And he built the train himself. I mean, he literally did. He rolled up his sleeves and he built it himself. And
that's fantastic.
It's incredible that he has that skill, because we would have been in trouble without him. And it was kind of the same with the plane. We thought, okay, great, we're going to find a period plane. That's the thing. And, meanwhile, Clint and Adolfo were like, yeah, we want it to be like this, Spitfire scenes in Dunkirk. And I'm like, okay, copy Spitfire scenes in Dunkirk.
Oh my God, that's great.
Okay. And, but then we found the plane, and we're like, okay, great, and then the insurance company was like, there's no way you're putting your lead actor up in a plane, like a tiny, tiny, tiny little biplane. That's not happening. And so we're like,
gosh.
Oh God, we're like, well, there goes Dunkirk. Sorry, and that was never going to work. And so again, John Lavin to the rescue. He built the cockpit of the plane himself. He did it again. And then our amazing special effects team and our special effects supervisor, Ryan Roundy, from Utah, built the gimbal, and that's how we did it. But yeah, it's kind of thinking about all this stuff really is bonkers on a movie that is so small. I mean, I feel like I've worked on a lot of indie movies. I started up in the non-union indie world in New York, and I worked my way up, and I've worked on really big budget stuff and small stuff. And I honestly, I have to say that I don't think I've ever done the volume of stuff that we did on this movie on a small movie. Like sometimes I don't really understand how it was possible.
It's remarkable. You should be really proud. And I want to ask about, while we're still on the topic of the plane is yellow, and I know that has some significance. If you could just speak to the kind of the color story, in particular with the color yellow in this film.
Oh yeah. The movie had to feel really naturalistic, but I know I was thinking a lot about, how do we weave in, as we were saying before, this dreamlike undercurrent. And when I first read the script, I saw Gladys as yellow. And what's so funny is that the costume designer Malgosha, saw it the same way. Like, we shared our first reference images, and not only did we have some of the exact same pictures, in our preliminary book, but we also were like, she's yellow. And for me, it was a way to weave in the dreams, but also to give Gladys a presence throughout the movie. She plays such a big part in the film, and she's such a big part of Grainier's life, and she has such a big impact that I wanted to, it was a way to feel both her presence and her absence, in a way that is hopefully very subtle. I mean, maybe most people don't even notice, the yellow, but it was just, it really signifies Gladys. And what's funny is I feel like this movie, the land, really didn't give us so much, because when on one of our very, very first scouts, we were looking at a fire tower, I think, and a fire tower that we couldn't end up shooting, by the way, and so we also had to build, but that's a different story. But we were like, great, we found the fire tower, and at the base of the fire tower was a field of yellow flowers, and so it kind of signal, they let us know that actually yellow was the right color, and that we could put it into the movie and also have it feel integral and authentic to the surroundings in the land.
Yeah,
so that's kind of great. How that came about. And so yellow is it's flowers, it's flowers in a field, it's the flowers that overgrow the cabin at the end of the movie, it's the plane, it's Gladys's dress, it's baby Kate's outfit, sometimes, not all the time. And so that's just a little thing that we did. But
it's a great detail.
It's special to me.
It is really special, and it's great to know that, to watch the film again. And obviously, I think it does subconsciously affect the viewer's experience, whether they know that or not. But to watch it again, knowing that, I think will just, enhance the film overall. I love that you have mentioned a couple of times this idea of listening to the land and letting the earth tell you things and guide you in a way. I think that's really beautiful. And I'm curious, when you're working with your greens team, of course, this is a film that is set very much in the wilderness. And there's a bit of this, I think it's always kind of funny with greens when you're trying to bring greens into the forest. You have to sort of shape the world around you while also leaning into what it is, what the space itself is. So what was that experience like of sort of crafting the woods within the woods themselves? Like, how did you kind of find that line between what you brought in and what you did to alter it versus just letting the space exist as it is? If that makes sense.
Gosh, it does make sense. I mean, I just want to say, shout out to my greens team, because what I will say is that I really had to campaign for my greens team. And I will say my greens team, there were 3 of them. There were 3 of them, or 4 of them sometimes. And I was always making a case about why we needed them, because, I think everyone's mind goes to indie movie, we're using the woods exist, check, and, not so, again, because the woods needs to transform, right, over, over time. And they were really, really amazing. I mean, I had Rob Joy from New Orleans. He read the script, and he's bonkers. He wouldn't mind me saying that. I love him. He's bonkers. He read the script, and he was like, oh my gosh, great. I'm so excited to not work on a stage, doing artificials. I'm ready. I'm coming. And he jumped in his van with his, I don't know, he had a bunch of cats and a bunch of dogs, and they all came up in the van and started driving. And I was like, whoa. I didn't get approved by the producer yet. He was like, doesn't matter, I'm coming. And so he arrived, and thank God he did. And then we also had the tremendous Matt Lask from Portland. And I think it was both of them were a really great combination, especially because I mean, Portland is a very different place and a different landscape to Spokane, but, he's very tapped into the energy and the foliage and of the Pacific Northwest. And so it was a really good team.
That's great.
And they were at every location. They were really at every location. And so much of we built the cabin on a very inhospitable piece of land that turned into a swamp when we broke ground, and they were burying logs in order to give us a support so that it didn't sink into the water. I mean, like crazy stuff that they were doing.
Wow.
And they transformed the cabin so many times, and making a set, trampling the grass anytime is going to ruin it. Imagine keeping the crew off the grass. It's really hard unless you have someone there, waving their finger saying, walk around, please. It gets destroyed really quickly. And poor PA, yeah. And this was already a complete swamp. And I'm just like, we had so little prep time. I was like, oh my God, we're going to have to turn this swamp into a beautiful acre of land. How we, and they did it, they did it. And there was a lot of conversation with them about, okay, well, what are, sourcing from the land. They did a lot of scavenging in Washington at other places and bringing it to wherever we were, so that everything felt integrated, even if it wasn't native to exactly where we were shooting. It was native to the place.
That's
in this movie, the forest isn't really, again, it's not really just a backdrop. It's the movie is constantly in conversation with the land, and Granier is in conversation with the land, and so
well put.
So were they,
Absolutely. I love that. I always think greens people are often this kind of like secret weapon of the art department, that I've learned this in some of the projects I've done here in Atlanta. I've built up like my trio of greens people that I call for everything. And it's like, no matter what it is, they're there and they're just so like engaged, and they become one with the earth around them.
Probably.
And I'm always like, if I wasn't a production designer, I'm not a particularly outdoorsy person, but there's something about that job of just like being out there and like transforming the earth in a way that you need it to work for you. And I just find it really amazing and admirable.
Yeah, and I'm kind of the same. And the way that you put it sounds really magical. But what I will say is that we shot in lots of different seasons, and it does snow in Spokane. And they were out in all different climates.
Not for the faint of heart, is it?
Yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart. And what I really appreciated is that construction and paint bring samples into your office to look at, and every few days I would have a different little beautiful piece of greenery to look at, or flowers in my office, and it was so nice.
That's beautiful.
There is something about doing something extremely hard like making movies, and then but doing it in this beautiful place, it kind of, I think, fills up your cup. Like when you're like, oh my God, the set is sinking, it's flooding, what are we gonna do? And you just look around and you like breathe it in, and the air is clean, and yeah, there's something about that is good for the soul.
The cabin is wonderful and full of such heart and character detail. I'm curious if you have a favorite detail in that space that might go unnoticed, but encapsulates the film's heart for you.
I mean, I absolutely love the fact that it's built out of real logs. I will say, like, everyone really thought I was crazy because there's there are so many scenes in the cabin, and we don't have any flywalls or any movie magic, nothing. And we built it exactly as they would have built a log cabin at the time, except we did have Butch with his excavator helping us sort of place the logs, because I don't know how the hell they did that back then. But the real logs and the texture of the bark, I absolutely love. And I think my favorite scene is maybe the overgrown cabin at the end. I really love greens. I think I've been fortunate to do a bunch of greens heavy movies, and that really is a lot of fun. But I would say the bark too, because we shot the movie with the exception of, I think, 2 scenes entirely with natural light. And so every single location I scouted, I had to think about, okay, well, the path of the sun. And that's normal. We do that all the time when we're scouting, but there were some locations that we didn't have until we were shooting. And so I was just like, okay, I got to go out with my compass for Adolfo and figure out like where to put the corners of everything based on the arc of the sun and the way that we place the windows, all of that. And I feel like the way that we did it allows for that natural texture to really be felt and show in the movie, if that makes sense. So I guess that's my favorite.
Yes, it does make sense, and it definitely shows. Now, the fire, I know you all did mostly practically with a little bit of stage work with volume, but so did you all just shoot out the cabin, everything that you needed to, and then at the end of the shoot, you burnt it?
Exactly.
Like a Burning Man sculpture.
Yeah, totally. And everyone's like, "Oh, Alex, you sad? Are you so sad to burn the cabin down?" I was like, "Hell no! That's what it's for." And that's also one of the reasons we built it out of entirely natural materials, so that when we're burning it, there's not crazy pollutants going into the air. But what I will say is that my supervising art director John Lavin did not feel the same way, and he refused to come to burning, and he said he was just so upset and he couldn't watch it burn.
Interesting. Wow.
I was like, yeah, burn it. I was like, burn it down. Right? I guess it would have been nice. It would have been nice if the property owners, who, by the way, I don't think they knew we built a cabin and burnt it on their property, but that's a separate conversation. But if they had kept it,
Netflix will deal with that. That's fine.
Yeah, and it would have become like an off-grid Airbnb. I mean, that would have been cool.
Oh gosh, that would have been really cool. But I do think it's so funny to hear that John was not into it, right? That you were into it, he wasn't. I think everybody has a different response to like set being torn down, but especially like this cabin that you build out of natural materials in the environment. I imagine that could be like a moment of catharsis for everyone, or a moment of great like sadness.
I think it was. I mean, mostly catharsis. Even Bill Macy, who wasn't even in those scenes, was like, "I'm coming," and we all went to the sacrificial cabin burning.
I love that, and he's brilliant in the film too. Gosh, he's great.
Yeah, he is great. He is great.
I'm curious, what did this film teach you about the natural world, about dreams, and the interface between those two things?
It's hard to tame the natural world, really. I will say. I feel like this movie is so meta because we, like I told you, we found the field of yellow flowers, which confirmed that yellow was the right color. And we were prepping this movie for quite a long time, but in stages, because we were delayed for the strike and then various other reasons. And so I had the opportunity to go back there a few times before we ended up going for real. And the time during the strike, we were there, and there was a very, very terrible forest fire, actually, right when we were there. And it completely decimated this entire area near Spokane called Medical Lake. It's very, very sad. But we were I looked at my map on, Google Maps, and we were surrounded by fires. I mean, the air was so thick, and the air quality was really terrible, but the light in the sky, everything was just very, very dramatic. And that place, Medical Lake, is actually where we ended up shooting all the cabin scenes. We shot in an area for the main cabin that hadn't been burned by the fire, but we did use the burned forest, and we did build the burnt down ashes version of the cabin there on that site. And land disturbed by fire actually becomes very fertile. And so we're like, great, we found the burned forest, perfect, we're gonna go there, we're gonna shoot it, it's gonna be perfect. And we could get there and we're like, oh my god, there's all this beautiful greenery, fresh lush green, like sprouting up from the ashes. Wow. We're like, great, we need this, but we need it to be burned. And so then we have to go and reburn the poor greenery away, And so that's the thing, is that like nature is, it's hard to tame, like it wants to come back stronger.
Yeah.
So that's what I learned about that part of the question. What was the second part of the question? The dreams.
I think there's an element to the natural world and dreams that is similar in this sense that you only have so much control
Definitely.
over what comes to, what
Yeah, that's true.
materializes.
I never remember my dreams, which is very upsetting to me, actually. And everyone's like, well, just when you wake up, write it down. And I can't write it down if it's already gone. Yeah, and I would like to be able to harness it. But yes, that's also something that's, hard to control.
Yeah. Well, you've harnessed the dreams in this film. It's really beautiful.
Thank
And
you.
I hope you feel good about it because I mean, just watching it was a really emotional experience, very therapeutic, and I can't wait to watch it again.
Yeah, I'm very proud of the movie, and I'm really surprised by its reception. Not because it's not a good movie, but because it's such a small little movie. It's it's kind of broken out in this amazing way, and it's touching people, and that's really special. That's really special.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy for Clint, and I hope he can make more movies like this.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's always great to chat with you, and it's really good to hear some of your reflections on making this film.
Yeah, thank you for the thoughtful questions. I feel like I got to dust off the old art school cobwebs when I talk to you. Got to be ready. Got to put that education to use. In preparation for this, I was like, okay, well, I know that we're going to go there, and so I thought I reopened, Ways of Seeing by John Berger.
Oh yes,
which
great
talks
book.
about like the mystical power of the image. I opened up Peter Brook's The Empty Space.
One of my
Yeah.
favorites.
And then,
oh my God, I come there all the time. I love that.
And then Bachelar's The Poetics of Space. So,
oh yes, another great. All three, excellent.
So I was like, oh, I'm ready for him.
Well, those three are basically my Bibles.
Your Bible.
It makes sense.
And from maybe The Creative Act as well.
Twyla Tharp.
Yeah.
Oh, well, The
Rick
Creative
Rubin.
Act by Twyla Tharp. Right. So Twyla Tharp is a creative habit. The Creative Act is Rick Rubin. You're right.
Rubin.
I love both of those.
And
The Collaborative Act by Twyla Tharp is another great one.
Oh, I don't know that one, but I feel like Rick Rubin has the answer to your creativity question.
But your answer was great. What I love about that question is it's not an especially easy question or an obvious question, and sometimes it frustrates people. But the results, the answers are always brilliant, and it might take a minute to get there. But it simply opens a window into thinking about what that even means. And every answer I've gotten has been excellent. So.
Okay, and do you feel like the answers are different, or they're similar because we're all production designers? Different.
Very different. I mean, that's the thing is that, doing this podcast, which is a production design podcast, and I think we talked briefly about this the other day, was that you might think that the conversation gets redundant because you're kind of talking about the same types of things, but it really doesn't. It's really amazing how everybody is so different. Everybody has such a different way of thinking, a way of working, and approaching design with a different perspective. And to me, it just paints a picture of how lucky are we to get to do this thing that we do, that you can come at it from so many different angles and still arrive at, this finished film, obviously in collaboration with all these other people. But I think that's a pretty amazing thing.
That brings us to the end of our conversation today. I'd like to give a shout out to my co-producer, Gavin Mosier, and the composer of our original music, Nathan Avakian. As a reminder, if you enjoyed today's program, please consider taking a moment to rate the podcast and subscribe for upcoming episodes. Until next time, happy holidays, and thanks for listening.